Come join Melissa and her guests on the Chats from the Blog Cabin podcast. From North Carolina, this podcast will have you feeling like you've known these folks for years. Listen in as they chat about life, culture, current events, and more, all with a special Southern flair. Curl up with your favorite beverage and get ready to be entertained. Tune in now for a unique experience that's fun and insightful.
Hi, y'all. Welcome back to another episode of Chats from the Blog Cabin. You know, the show where I virtually invite people into the blog cabin to chat about life. And today we're chatting about a lot of controversial topics. I will say this is going to be a very controversial topic, but I think that to be fair, we have to know both sides of the story and hear both sides of the story instead of coming in with preconceived notions. I'm chatting with Stuart, who is the author of Inside the Meatrix. And we're going to talk about being a vegetarian. We're going to talk about factory farms. We're going to talk about a whole bunch of different stuff. But Stuart, first tell us a little bit about yourself before we get into these controversial topics.
All right. Thank you, Melissa. It's a pleasure to be here. I grew up in the state of Kentucky, and it's a beautiful state with, wonderful people. My family and friends are here. But unfortunately, it's one of the least healthy states in our nation. In fact, Kentucky ranks 48th in healthy behaviors and 47th in health outcomes. And there's only one other state that has more people with multiple chronic conditions than the state of Kentucky. And I'm not saying that to poo-poo our state. I'm just saying that because this is the environment I grew up in. There were so many people around me who were struggling with their health. From heart disease and cancer, hypertension, diabetes, and more. And I grew up around that and just thought that it was inevitable. We were all going to come down with some sort of chronic condition, and the best that we could hope for was to manage it somehow with pills, shots, and surgeries. But fortunately, at the age of 23, I made a lifestyle change that I thought would offer me the best chance of avoiding so many of the chronic conditions that I was seeing in the lives of everyone around me. And I gave up eating meat. And I did that because science had come out saying that the saturated fats found in meat would lead to heart disease. And I didn't want to become a statistic. I didn't want to have a heart attack. And so I gave up eating meat in, like I said, 1985 at the age of 23. And then I became fully plant-based in 2008 and have been ever since. And I gave up, cheese and dairy and eggs back then. And so what I have discovered in my own life is that when we escape the Meatrix and eat a plant-based diet, that it restores our health and it preserves our health. But that's not just me saying it. The science that I share in my book supports that a plant-based lifestyle can do all of this and more, because it can also help avert some of the worst case scenarios that we're facing right now with climate change. And we can dive into that as well.
So you said Kentucky was not the worst. What's the worst state then?
Well, our neighbor, West Virginia, has more people with multiple chronic health conditions than Kentucky. And, that's our neighbor to the east of us. So.
Wow. Do you think it's because people are more concentrated in that location because they're not considered really big states? So there's more concentration of people. That's why it's showing up.
I think that it's because of our lifestyles, honestly, Melissa. And also in the eastern part of our state, it's very mountainous. We have the Appalachian Mountains there that are, not like the Rocky Mountains today, but they were, huge at one point, but they're much smaller now. But it's an area where there's been a lot of poverty. There's not been a lot of investment over the years in infrastructure. There are food deserts in eastern Kentucky. Access to healthcare and education is low. And so I think there's a lot of reasons why that is. And of course, West Virginia is just the neighbor. So, our health and the environment doesn't respect state lines or any kind of, boundaries. So I think the conditions in the area, just transfer across from West Virginia into Kentucky and vice versa.
Now, there's one thing that I noticed when when your person sent me the talking notes, but also I've noticed as well. Why is it so expensive to eat healthy? Like you said about being a vegetarian and eating healthy. Why is that so outrageous when you go to the grocery store or you buy? Why is it?
Well, a lot of it has to do with the inequities that are kind of baked into our food system. So plant-based foods get much less assistance from the federal government than animal-based foods. So for instance, in 2019, the beef industry in the United States received $9 billion in indirect payments from the government. That's just a handout to beef producers to create affordable hamburgers for us to eat. Without the government involvement, the cost of meat would be prohibitive for most people. Historically speaking, meat has been a luxury item that only the wealthiest could enjoy. And that's why it's so special. For holidays and stuff, we bring out, more and more meat because it's a sign of affluence, and it makes us, it's a celebratory type of food. But what has happened through the subsidies is we've taken these luxury foods and we've made them extremely economical. And so we're consuming them at much higher rates now than ever before. So I think one of the things is that the government's involved with keeping these prices artificially low. For instance, for every dollar that a lentil grower receives from our government in assistance, a cattle rancher receives $470. And for every mushroom grower, they get $1. A pork producer gets $160. And if you're growing oats, you get $1, and the dairy industry gets $80. So that's baking in inequities into the system. And that's why plant-based foods are often so much more expensive than the animal-based foods. It's because our government is subsidizing them. And unfortunately, we're paying for that with our tax dollars. Our tax dollars are going into these subsidies to create these foods that end up making so many people sick. And of course, the corporations are profiting from our buying these foods. And then of course, Big Pharma comes in to try to create medicines to help us deal with these chronic conditions that are a result of a poor diet. So it's a kind of complicated web that we're living in. And so I wanted to, write my book to kind of connect the dots for some people to understand, what's happening and really what's at stake. Because, I was happy to just eat this way for many years and let other people do their own thing. But we're at a critical time on our planet right now. And we can talk about climate change and what's happening on our planet and how animal agriculture fuels climate change. And so we need to make some hard decisions about, what kind of foods do we want to grow, and where do the subsidies are they going to go? The Farm Bill comes out, I think, this September of this year. And I know there are a lot of people who are trying to, get money from the Farm Bill to produce their foods. And so I think we need to restructure the subsidies away from animal-based foods and give more money to plant-based foods.
Okay, so we're going to talk about how we can introduce more plant-based foods into our lives after a brief commercial. So we'll be right back.
Okay.
Hey y'all, it's Melissa coming to you from the Blog Cabin to chat about, for a few minutes, one of my favorite conferences that are coming up. It's called the Rise Up Christian Parenting Conference. Whether you feel like you've blown it as a parent or you're not sure how to navigate the next season of parenting, or you have non-Christian family or friends telling you how to raise your kids, I don't know how many times I got that, or you simply want to be challenged, encouraged, inspired, and equipped to be the best parent you can be, then the Rise Up Parenting Conference is one that you won't want to miss. The conference runs from March 14th through the 16th, but grab your free ticket by the 13th, so on the 14th you're ready to go. And the conference runs from 10 to 2 every day. But don't worry, if you can't make it from 10 to 2, you can always catch the replays later at your own time. So this is one conference that I highly recommend that you check out, plus it's free. How many times do you have a free conference? I will put in the show notes where you can find it. Be blessed. And we're back chatting with Stuart, who wrote it Inside the Meatrix, or Escape the Meatrix. So let's talk about how hard it is to incorporate plant-based foods into, because obviously you don't want to completely go cold turkey, because your body is going to go what they call meat withdrawal or something. You want to gradually put it in, and then so your body gets used to it.
Yes, that's right. I mean, for me, I did it overnight, and I don't really remember that it was hard because it was 38 years ago, and I don't remember what was going on when I was 23. Now at the age of 61, but if we ever try to make adjustments to our lifestyle, like we try to give up caffeine or give up sugar, there's a period where our bodies are going to go through a withdrawal, and we're going to feel kind of lousy for a little while. So let's take caffeine as an example. If you gave up caffeine today, you'd be fine for the rest of the day. But by this time tomorrow, you would have a pretty bad headache, probably, depending on how much caffeine you've been consuming on a daily basis. But if you, over the course of a week, gradually wean yourself off of caffeine, having less and less every day, after a week, you're caffeine free, you're not suffering from headaches, you feel great, and your body's getting into its own natural rhythms for giving you energy. You're not relying on that caffeine. Well, the same thing can happen with moving away from animal-based foods. We don't have to do it overnight, and you can do it gradually. And any kind of change you can make towards eating more whole fruits, vegetables, legumes, grains, nuts, and seeds, the better off you're going to be. So you could start with just one day a week, and then after a while, maybe make it 2 days a week, or say, one meal a day, I'm going to, not eat meat or dairy or whatever, and just, make the transition slowly. And, and if one day, you can't do it, don't beat yourself up about it. This is something that we're all on a journey, and we can do it at our own pace. And we just need to pick ourselves back up and do the best we can where we are with what we have at the time, is what I always tell people. So, yeah.
What's the first thing you would suggest for people that are looking to try to transition out of eating a lot of meat? What would be the first thing that you suggest they try to substitute in for?
Well, we're accustomed to centering a meal around a piece of animal protein on our plates. I grew up this way. My parents taught me to eat meat, and our society reinforced that, throughout my lifetime. And so what I say in my book is that, none of us, or very few of us anyway, consciously chose to consume animal-based foods. It's just something that we were taught at an early age. And because it's all we've ever known, we think it's natural, necessary, and nutritious to do that. But the science that I share in my book says, it's none of those things. So it seems normal because, that's what we've been taught throughout our whole life. And that's what most of us have been doing for our whole lives. And so to make the transition easier, I think is, if you have a meal that you prepare with chicken, you can substitute the chicken with a plant-based chicken substitute. And there's plenty out there in the grocery stores today. There's so many more meat analogs in the grocery store. You have companies like Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods that are creating, nutritious and healthy meat analogs, basically made from plants, and they taste a lot more like chicken and hamburger than they used to, just even 4 or 5 years ago. So they're making improvements every year in that regard. So I think one of the easiest ways is to just substitute the meat on your plate with one of these plant-based meat alternatives, and you cook your meal just the same way. And there's also dairy alternatives. So you can find these foods in the grocery store. And yes, they do cost a little bit more, but with inflation and the price of meat and, eggs have skyrocketed, it's not, it's probably on an equal amount now in terms of the cost, but you don't have to eat those packaged plant-based foods. You can just eat whole foods like brown rice and beans and potatoes, and you can get your vegetables and fruits seasonally. You can even grow your own. So there's a lot of different ways that you can do this to make this work, and it can be affordable to do. There's a woman who has a cookbook out called plant-based on a budget, I think. And she shows how you can, eat this way on $30 a week. So it can be done. It just takes a little bit more effort because, we're not in a plant-based society.
So do you think, looking back, would it be harder for you now to go plant-based? Or do you think because you said you were in your 60s, because you went when you were in your 20s, do you think in your 60s it would be harder for you to go plant-based if you hadn't gone plant-based before?
I think as we age, into our routines and we can kind of get into ruts, and I myself can get into food ruts too, even as a plant-based eater. So I think at the end of the day, we're talking about behavior modification. We need to modify our behavior, and the more years that we are living a certain lifestyle, it's going to be a little bit more challenging, I think, to change that. But I think it can be done, and I think it can be done gradually. And for me, I always keep my vision in mind. What is it that I'm trying to do? And that always motivates me and keeps me on the path, so to speak. And so I think if someone wants to make this transition, to read my book and learn the science and the facts that all support, making this lifestyle change. And then once you know the science and the reasons behind it, then I think it makes it easier to make this transition.
Do you think it would have been easier if you were still 23 and you were transitioning to now, because there's so many more alternatives for you out there?
Definitely. Definitely. Oh my gosh. It was like a wasteland back in 1985. I mean, there was only one milk alternative. I think it was called by a company called Eden Soy, and it was a soy milk. That was the only soy milk you could find. And then there was like one brand of tofu. I mean, it is so much easier today, and there's so many more options available that it's never been easier or tastier to give this lifestyle a try.
And you probably had to be very creative when you first started about what you were eating, because you didn't want to keep eating the same things over and over and over again.
Right. And, the way to get the most benefit health-wise from eating this way is to eat what's called a rainbow. You want to eat a wide variety of fruits and vegetables and eat all the colors of the different varieties of fruits and vegetables that are available, because that's where the phytonutrients are that bring us so much health. And so, we want to make sure that we're eating from a wide variety of fruits and vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts and seeds, and just eat as many as we can over the course of a week. And that helps nourish our microbiome. And I think they say 70% of our immune system is connected with our gut. And so that's why when you eat healthy plant-based foods, it improves our immune system. And, it's just a cascading effect of health that comes to us. It's amazing. So I highly recommend people, give this a try, because it's never been easier, Melissa. Yeah.
You keep commenting about climate change. So let's talk about what climate change has done to, what factory farms, because it's not really the small farmers, it's the factory farmers that are out there to make a mega buck that are doing to our climate.
Well, our mainstream media talks about climate change almost every day. We hear about it, and we know that the burning of fossil fuels releases carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And so mainstream media is reporting that we need to move away from burning fossil fuels into clean energy solutions like wind and solar, and we need to start driving electric vehicles. But what the mainstream media never talks about is the carbon footprint of the food on our plates. And the World Bank, two environmentalist scientists at the World Bank did a study, and they looked at the carbon emissions from animal agriculture throughout the whole supply chain. And they determined that 51% of all human-made greenhouse gases are generated from livestock and animal agriculture. And that's huge. If all the meat and dairy cows on the planet were a country, they would have more greenhouse gas emissions than the UK and the EU combined. And so that is why it's so vital that we talk about this. We talk about the carbon footprint of the food we eat, because mainstream media isn't talking about it. And Oxford University did a study and said that Americans could lower their carbon footprint by 73% simply by becoming plant-based and giving up meat and dairy. So there's not one other thing that you could do that could lower your personal carbon footprint by that much. I mean, you could put solar panels on your house and drive an electric car and all that, but you could never lower your carbon footprint by 73% by doing anything else. And that's how powerful it is in terms of the environment. So I have some charts in my book that show, the environmental cost of growing a variety of foods. And so I have a chart that shows the cost to the environment of growing plant-based foods and animal-based foods. And then I have a chart about showing, protein-rich animal-based foods and protein-rich plant-based foods. And these charts are amazing because they're potent, visual representations of the science that my book is talking about, and that plant-based foods are far superior to animal-based foods in every environmental category, from land use to water use to energy use and greenhouse gas emissions and eutrophication. In fact, just one example is it takes 100 times more land to produce 1 gram of beef than it does 1 gram of tofu. I mean, that's an amazing difference. 70% of the grain that we grow in the United States, Melissa, we feed to livestock, 70%. And, we could be growing food for humans instead. In fact, if we grew food on the same amount of land and we fed it to humans, guess how many more people in the United States alone we could feed?
I have no clue, and I don't even want to guess because I know I'm going to be way off.
Well, okay, we could feed an additional 1 billion people in the United States if we instead grew food for human consumption rather than animal consumption. And globally, we could feed an additional 4 billion people. So this is, these kinds of statistics and figures blew my mind. I really had no idea that, so much of our land and water and resources were going to feeding animals instead of humans. 10% of the people in this country are food insecure. They don't have enough food to eat. There's children in this country that don't get enough food to eat. And we're feeding so much to animals. Why is that? And there are people, like I said, in Eastern Kentucky who don't have access to healthy food. They're nutritionally insecure. They don't have access to healthy food. So, why are we growing all this food to feed to animals when we have people who are hungry and not getting proper nutrition? It just doesn't make sense to me. And I know that, there are a lot of people who say, well, we need to do that because we need the animal protein and we need the calcium from dairy for strong bones. But that's a myth. That's not true. The Meatrix does not have a monopoly on protein, and the dairy industry doesn't have a monopoly on calcium. In fact, one serving of kale has more calcium than a serving of dairy. So these are nutrients that can be found in a wide variety of plant-based foods. And so that's why it's so important for the climate. Methane is a potent greenhouse gas. So we talked about carbon dioxide that's created from burning fossil fuels. But methane is a greenhouse gas that's emitted by ruminant animals. So that's cows, sheep, goats, and lambs. And methane is over the first 20 years, methane is 80 times more potent at trapping heat into our atmosphere than carbon dioxide. So why is the media giving methane a free ride? We don't talk about methane, but that is the low-hanging fruit. If we're serious about making changes in our climate and our greenhouse gas emissions, we should be trying to avoid all of the methane emissions that we could. And according to the EPA, the single largest source of methane emissions in the United States comes from animal agriculture. So that should be the first place we're looking if we're wanting to achieve our climate goals. That's where we should be looking. And no one's talking about this. And this is a real problem. The population right now, we have 8 billion people on the planet, and it's expected to go to 9.8 billion globally by the year 2050, and that's around a 22% or so increase. But the demand for meat and dairy is expected to go up by 60% by 2050. And so this is a huge problem. We're going to have all this demand for meat and dairy, but we're not going to have land to grow the crops to feed the animals to get the meat and dairy. So, in fact, climate scientists say there's no way we can achieve our greenhouse gas goals without a widespread adoption of a plant-based lifestyle. There's just no way that the numbers cannot work by having a global population of people eating more and more animal-based foods and averting the worst case scenarios of climate change. The numbers just don't add up.
Now I'm going to be a devil's advocate here for a minute, because each time you keep saying plant-based, I think, what happens when, climate change is coming around and you see where California has these huge droughts. Right now, they're not in a drought because they're having all that rain and snow. But how are they going to be able to plant the crops and allow the crops to grow if we're having in a drought? Whereas the cattle, at least you're getting something from it. So that's what my devil advocate is when you're talking about planting more food for plant consumption instead of the beef. How can we make sure that we have enough to water the plants so they can grow, so we don't end up going in starvation?
Right. That's a good question. Well, as I said just a moment ago, 70% of the grain that we're growing in this country right now, we're feeding to livestock. So if we grew crops for humans, we wouldn't need to grow. We could feed an additional 1 billion people in the US, and we don't need to feed that many people. So we could actually give land back to nature and let nature rewild that land. And that's going to store more carbon into the soil. So it's actually a win-win. We would be using a lot less land and a lot less water if we grew plants for human rather than animal consumption.
What do you think the turnaround would be, though? Because obviously there'll be a few years where it's like, okay, we're still trying to get more carbon into the soil. How long do you think that turnaround would have to take?
I don't really know how long it would take. I know that, when we let nature do its thing, it is going to start storing more and more carbon into the soil. But how long of a transition it would take, I don't know. But as I said earlier, methane is one of the most potent greenhouse gases that we have. And actually, nitrous oxide is 300 times more potent at trapping heat into our atmosphere than methane. And, nitrous oxide comes from other things, but when cow urine is nitrogen rich, and when it breaks down into the soil, it releases nitrous oxide, which is, like I said, 300 times more potent than carbon dioxide at heating up our planet. So, it's not just the methane, it's also the nitrous oxide that will be eliminated. Of course, we're not going to get rid of all ruminant animals overnight. This would be something that's gradual, but the government should be incentivizing farmers away from, raising animals and growing crops to feed animals, because this is not healthy for us. We have declining health, and the science in my book shows that a plant-based lifestyle can help us avoid so many of the chronic conditions that are plaguing so many Americans. And, it would just really eliminate so much needless suffering, and we would have longer, healthier, happier lives by adopting a plant-based lifestyle, and it would be so much better for the planet. So yes, we would need water to grow crops, but we would be growing so many fewer crops that we would actually save water and we would save land.
So how long do you think, I know you said earlier you didn't know around the time for the turnaround, but how long do you think it would be before we got all those gases and the carbon dioxide and you said nitrous oxide from the actual soil? How long do you think that'll take?
Well, I don't know. I haven't seen or come across any studies that talk about any projections. I do know that, we're much closer to having green energy than we are green food. And we can focus all of our energies on solar and wind, but as long as we're ignoring regenerative agriculture and creating a green agricultural system, we're never going to achieve our climate goals. So, we need to do this in a multifaceted approach. for sure, but we can't ignore the agricultural segment of this because it is so powerful. And that's what I'm advocating for, and I think methane, ruminant animals, because of methane and nitrous oxide, they're like the low hanging fruit. So I would say for anyone who is looking to reduce their personal carbon footprint is to give up beef. That would make a huge reduction in your greenhouse gas emissions right there, because the greenhouse gas emissions from growing crops and watering crops and feeding cows is huge. We have really horrible food conversion rates when it comes to animal agriculture. So I can share some of this information with you. So the best food conversion rates we have right now, Melissa, are with factory farm chickens. But even then, we're feeding chickens 4.5 times more edible food than we get back from them. And for cows, it's even worse. We're feeding cattle 25 times more edible food than we get back from them. And these are conversion rates for edible food. And that's really important, because a lot of people will say, well, these animals, eat food that, humans can't eat, like grass and hay and stuff like that. But these conversion rates are for edible food. That's food that we could eat as human beings. We're giving it to the animals and getting so little in return. And if we look at just the protein, 80% of the protein that we feed to chickens and 96% of the protein that we feed to cows is lost. We never get that back. So it's a horrible return on investment. And it's something that's just not sustainable. Like I said, we're going to have 10 billion people on the planet by 2050. We can no longer continue to get, such horrible returns on investment. So animal agriculture is a losing proposition when you just look at the numbers. They just don't add up.
Here's another thing that popped into my head as you were talking, because you were talking about how the chemicals and things like that. But what about the pesticides that are used on the plant-based foods? Because there's a lot of farmers that don't believe in organic, that they want to use the pesticides. Because I know a lot came out. I'm just putting this out here, not to say that it's on our food, but a lot came out during Vietnam where our government used Agent Orange, which they thought were safe, but now they're seeing studies of veterans. My dad was a victim of it, who have died from exposure to Agent Orange. So let's talk about, the pesticides that we actually go on the food and how we can kind of curb that as well, so that gets more people going toward the plant-based diet.
That's a good question. I advocate for organic foods as much as possible, because the pesticides and fertilizers, these are also contributing to climate change, and there are petrochemicals. And so we want to divest ourselves from that as much as possible. But, again, getting back to the fact that we grow 70% of the grain in this country to feed the animals, just simply by growing crops for human consumption, we're going to lower that number considerably. And I think most of those crops that are grown for animals are using the pesticides that you're talking about. And so, there's that alone, moving to a plant-based lifestyle will help bring down the amount of pesticides that are, in the planet, getting into the groundwater and things like that. But I also know that plant-based foods sometimes are not organic. Sometimes plant-based foods are grown what they call conventionally. And, I advocate for buying, if you can afford it, the organic variety of produce and vegetables. And, the price it's becoming, there's a greater price parity between conventional and organic now. I mean, organic bananas are a little bit more expensive, maybe 10 cents a pound than conventional bananas, I think. And apples are the same way. So, we're seeing more price parity. And as more people, vote with their dollars for organic foods, we're going to see more farmers opting to grow those foods. It's a supply and demand kind of thing as well. And every time we buy a food, we're voting with our dollars, and we're telling these industries what it is we want. And so I think if we can afford it, we should buy, organic and go for, plant-based foods, because that is what we'll be telling the industries that we want more of. But I think it's kind of, as I talked about earlier, that's kind of from the bottom up. That's a grassroots movement. And there's not enough people who identify as plant-based right now to, make a huge change. So that's why I think with legislation, there needs to be changes from above too, with the farm bill and with subsidies that are provided to farmers. We need to, just like the, green energy sector has had help from the government to fund their industry and get it up and running. So will plant-based farmers need help from the government to get their farms working as efficiently as possible, and to help farmers, move away from animal-based foods into plant-based foods. So the government has a role to play here as well.
So how can you, if you go into the grocery store, obviously you want to buy as much local as possible when you're plant-based, because you actually know with farmer. But if you don't have that, and you don't have like a Trader Joe's or a Whole Foods, how do you go to, like, say, your local Walmart and say, okay, I want to try my plant-based foods. What can I buy that I'm sure is organic? Because people say some products say they're organic, and then when you do a little bit of research, you find out they're not as organic as they say they are. They're like right there on the little cusp of organic and not organic. So how can we be sure of what we're buying is organic?
Well, I would look for certifications, on the packaging that would say, who is certifying that this product is organic. And then if you have questions about, that organization, then look them up online to see, how well respected this stamp of approval for something being organic, whether, you agree with their assessment. And basically, so these companies that do verify whether a food is organic or not. There's different ones out there, and some of them have stricter requirements than others. So I think we just need to educate ourselves about those companies and the certifications. So many of the labels on foods today are very misleading. And I think corporations do this because they know that the consumer wants to do, quote, the right thing. They want to do something that's good for them and good for the animals and good for the environment. So they put things, sound bites, basically marketing sound bites on their packages, like cage free and free range and things like that, as well as organic. And, it's up to us as the consumer to kind of, I think it was Ronald Reagan said, trust but verify. We need to, we can't just take their word for it. We need to verify and look into exactly what they're saying when they say something is free range or organic. So there's falls ultimately to a certain extent back on the consumer to become educated about these things, which is one of the reasons why I wrote my book.
Of course. Now, I interviewed, like, in the very beginning when I first started this podcast, I interviewed a lady that was talking about clean beauty and the chemicals and making sure, the chemicals that we put on our skin and things like that. And there's a couple of apps that you can go on and check. Is there any app that you can go on to check plant-based foods, of what's in it and whether it's the cleanest that you can eat?
Wow. That's a good question. I really don't know. I have to look that up. I'm not really sure. I know there are apps that'll help you find, plant-based foods at restaurants in different cities when you're traveling and things like that. I'm sure there's a resource out there for that, Melissa, but I don't, off the top of my head, know. There's an organization I just discovered. I think it's called aswesow.org. I think that's the name of it. I was on their website because I was researching about chocolate, and they did a report on some of the health benefits and some of the problems with chocolate. And so I think aswesow.org, they might be a good resource for that. I'm not sure though.
You just brought up chocolate, but let me tell you, the number one thing that most people go on is coffee.
Yes.
Is coffee is plant-based, correct? Or no?
Yes, it is. Yeah. There is one consideration, though, people might want to think about with coffee. So, like I talked about how my book has charts that show the environmental impacts of growing a variety of foods. And, most of the, animal-based foods are worse in terms of their water use and land use. But there are a couple plant-based food items that actually require quite a bit of water, and coffee is one of them. So if you're concerned about, the water use and you want to conserve water, you could maybe lower your footprint, your water footprint by, foregoing coffee or just reducing your consumption of coffee. And unfortunately, I don't drink coffee, but I do eat chocolate. And chocolate was another one of those plant-based foods that is water intensive, not necessarily to grow, I don't think, but in the processing of it. So that was surprising to me to learn that, Melissa, because I didn't know that any plant-based foods would be using that much water. But chocolate and coffee, unfortunately, are two that require quite a bit of water.
And they're probably two of the biggest sellers of plant-based foods, correct?
Yeah, unfortunately.
So our time is almost up. Before we talk about where we can find your book and where they can contact you for more information, do you have one last little nugget that you want to share?
Well, I just want to share, what's behind the title of my book, which is Escape the Meatrix. And so I'm using the world in the Matrix movies as a metaphor for our world. And so, in the Matrix movies, artificial intelligence has taken over the planet and it's using humans as an energy source. They're farming humans. And I say our world is like the Matrix because, we've taken over this planet. There's 8 billion of us now, and we're using farmed animals as our energy source. And so that's why I say we're living in the Matrix. And so my book is offering the reader a red pill, and the red pill is because we have a choice. We were taught to eat animal-based foods at a very early age, and because of that, it seems natural, necessary, and nutritious. And like I said, the science in my book shows that that's not true, that we do have a choice. Most people eat animal-based foods mainly because they've acquired a taste for them and they enjoy the taste of it. But also we do it because, we think we need it to be healthy. And that's why my parents taught me to eat animal-based foods, is because they wanted me to grow up to be healthy and strong, because that's what their parents taught them. And so we think we don't have a choice, but we do. And, by choosing the red pill and escaping the Matrix and adopting a plant-based lifestyle, we're doing an enormous benefit to not only our own health, but to the health of the planet and the health of the animals. But, we can choose the blue pill too, but that's tantamount to maintaining the status quo. And we know where that's going to take us, because we can just look at the news today and see the effects of environmental degradation, biodiversity loss, mass extinction rates, emerging infectious diseases fueled by animal agriculture, and of course, climate change. So that's the blue pill. And I'm hoping people, when they read my book and look at the science and see what it says, that they will choose the red pill. And any kind of change we can make to move away, Melissa, from eating animal-based foods, the better. And it can be done gradually, and it doesn't have to be 100% even. There are a lot of plant-based eaters out there that are like, militant about it. And, you have to be 100% and all this. I'm not one of those people. I don't want to blame and shame people. I want to inform people, because I think once, we have the science, we can make better decisions, starting with the food on our plate. So I just invite people to read my book with an open mind and to explore this plant-based lifestyle for yourself and for the planet. And one last thing I will leave is that, Business Insider said that a hamburger isn't something that's bought and paid for, but a symbol of a debt that one day must be repaid. And that's because, the environmental cost of bringing that burger to you is not calculated into what you pay for it. It's something that's, we're going to have to pay for it eventually. And our children and grandchildren are going to inherit a debt so vast that they could never repay it if we keep eating in the Matrix. So I encourage people, if you have children or grandchildren or want to someday, to, escape the Matrix and eat plants, and, you will make a better future for everyone on the planet by doing that. So
I do like one thing that you said right there. You said you're not militant about making sure everybody eats this. It's okay if you say, okay, Wednesday night, we're going to forgo eating meat and we're going to eat plant-based all Wednesday, or a couple of days a week.
Yeah.
Plant-based.
I think for me that the ultimate would be for people to flip that script and say, oh, Saturday night's a special occasion. I'm going to have a beef hamburger. Or, this is so-and-so's graduation. Let's, and I don't equate eating animal-based foods with celebration. I don't. I see animal-based foods as, suffering. Suffering. So I don't equate animal-based foods with being celebratory, but some people do. And, that can still continue. It's not the occasional piece of meat on our plate that's killing the planet. It's eating it 3 times a day. So rather than saying, we can start out by saying, I'm going to give up meat on Wednesdays or whatever. But I think eventually the goal would be to eat plants, predominantly in your life, and then say for special occasions. There are people who only drink a glass of wine on the weekends and don't drink any during the week. So maybe your animal-based food consumption could be like that. Everyone who's on a diet has a cheat day. Well, a plant-based lifestyle isn't a diet, but you could say, I'm going to eat this way, but then for certain occasions, I will let myself, have a steak. It's not great for the cow, of course, and it's not great for the planet, but, just like one salad doesn't make you healthy, eating one steak isn't going to wreck your health either. It's the eating of animal-based foods 3 times a day over the course of a lifetime that leads to all these chronic conditions that are killing so many Americans. That could be avoided, honestly. In the science in my book, I go through the top 10 reasons people are dying in this country, and I list the science that shows how a plant-based lifestyle can help you avoid, reverse, or prevent this chronic condition. And it's heart disease, cancer, Alzheimer's disease, diabetes, hypertension. The list goes on and on. So.
Wow, you've certainly given us a lot to think about. I mean, honestly, and guys, Stuart, tell us where they can find you if they want more information.
Okay, yes, my website is stuartwaldner.com, and I'm on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn. And they can find my book on Amazon.
Yeah, it's called Escape the Meatrix. And you've obviously given a lot of thought, and you've done a lot of your research on this subject. And I just can't wait to hear exactly what people do with this information. Because this book has not been out that long, has it?
No, it's been out about 4 months. So, I'm excited that it's out there. I spent years researching it. And like I said, I have years of lived experience, living this lifestyle. And, my primary care physician wrote a great endorsement for my book saying, that I'm an outlier in his practice because I am so healthy because of the way I'm living my life compared to his other patients. And so, like I said earlier, there are a lot of unhealthy people in Kentucky, and, there are ways, I know if I can do it, other people can do it too. And it's always better to adopt a healthy lifestyle before you're sick. But even if you've been diagnosed with a chronic condition or you're suffering from a chronic condition, you can help stabilize or reverse that through a plant-based lifestyle. The National Institute of Health says that a plant-based lifestyle is the best for preventing and managing diabetes. I mean, so the list goes on and on. So Benjamin Franklin said, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So it's best to, adopt a healthy lifestyle before you're diagnosed with something. But even if you have been, you can adopt this way of eating, and you may see, drastic improvements. And there are a lot of medical doctors out there now who are practicing food as medicine, and they're seeing, amazing results from their patients who adopt this way of living. So I encourage people to choose the red pill. You won't be sorry.
Well, Stuart, thank you for coming on and for sharing. Once again, his book is called Escape the Meatrix, and it's inside the Meatrix he talks about how, the animal farms, doing climate change, everything else that goes into our environment, how adopting a plant-based lifestyle, even if it's only for a couple of days a week, would make a huge change in climate change. So thank you, Stuart. And I will put in the show notes everywhere where you can find Stuart, where you can buy his book as well.
Thank you, Melissa. It's been a pleasure chatting with you. Thanks.
All right. So guys, be blessed, and we'll see you on the next chat from the Blog Cabin. Bye.